All right, so we are diving into autism spectrum disorder today.
Oh,
And, ASD is one of those things where the more you learn, the more you realize how much you didn't know. And trust me, I've been neck deep in cheap ABA understanding autism spectrum disorder prepping for this.
it's true. Even those of us who work with ASD constantly, find ourselves surprised.
Right.
That's the nature of a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
It's not one straight line. It's more
Well,
like,
it's like one of those fireworks that explodes in all directions at once.
yes, yes.
Speaking of which, this deep dive is for asterisk. Yep. You want to understand ASD better? We're going to make sure it's not just a bunch of jargon.
Exactly, because spectrum is the key word here. What does that actually mean in practical terms? Well, think of it this way. Two people diagnosed with ASD could have completely different strengths and challenges.
Oh, wow.
It's not one size fits all at all.
Right, so we all know what rain is,
Yeah.
but a drizzle versus a monsoon are two totally different experiences.
Perfect analogy. And this is where cheap ABA is really helpful.
Okay.
They get into those two core categories the DSM-5 talks about. You know that big old manual of mental health diagnoses?
Okay, hit us with them. What are the categories and why should we care?
The first one is all about social interaction. Differences in social communication and social interaction.
Okay.
This is where things can get tricky because we often misinterpret what's going on.
See, that's interesting to me right away because we all know someone who's a little off socially, and maybe they're awkward or quiet, but that's not always ASD.
Right. Exactly. It goes way deeper than just being shy or introverted.
Okay.
This category is all about how someone understands and responds to social cues, and M. That unspoken language we use all the time.
Okay, so like if someone tells a joke and I give a pity laugh even though it wasn't funny, I'm reading the social asterisk cue, not the actual humor.
Precisely. But for someone with ASD, that kind of social dance can be really asterisk tough.
Right.
They might miss those subtle cues, like when it's their turn to talk, or how someone's body language contradicts their words.
Which explains why sometimes I feel like I'm talking asterisk at asterisk. Someone with ASD, not asterisk with asterisk them.
Yeah.
It's like we're missing that connection.
And that connection is called social emotional reciprocity. It's
Yeah.
that back and forth flow we expect in conversations. But it can be challenging for someone with ASD.
So imagine trying to have a catch with someone, but they don't throw the ball back. That's got to be frustrating for both people, right?
Exactly. And cheap ABA gives this great example. A child with ASD might struggle to start a chat with other kids, or they might completely dominate the conversation without realizing it.
Yeah.
It's that balance that's hard.
Which makes me think, what about nonverbal cues?
Yeah.
Like facial expressions, tone of voice, even just eye contact stuff we might not even realize we're sending and receiving constantly.
That's huge EE and often misunderstood. Cheap ABA uses the example of a simple wave.
Yeah.
A neurotypical person sees that as a friendly greeting, but someone with ASD might not even register it, or they might not get the social meaning.
Wow, it's like we're speaking different languages even if we're both using English words.
That's a great way to put it. And this can make developing and maintaining relationships really tough. Imagine trying to navigate friendships, schoolwork without that intuitive understanding of social rules.
Especially because every single setting has asterisk unwritten rules.
Right.
Like you might behave differently at a party than you do at a funeral.
Right. Exactly. And it's not always obvious to someone with ASD.
Yeah.
Cheap ABA talks about a child with ASD speaking loudly in a library.
Right.
Now they're not trying asterisk to be disruptive. They just might not get that it's not socially appropriate.
It's like they're constantly having to play catch up with these unspoken rules.
Yeah.
Which would be exhausting. But this actually reminds me of a study I came across recently about.
It's true. Social situations can feel like navigating a minefield for some people with ASD. But that doesn't mean they can't learn, especially with support and understanding from those around them.
Absolutely. It's all about creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable being themselves.
Yeah.
Now we spent a good chunk of time on that first core category of ASD, the social communication piece. But cheap ABA doesn't stop there. They also dig into restricted or repetitive behaviors, interests, or activities. And this one really hits home for me.
Ooh, do tell.
Well, I've always been a creature of habit. Like if my morning coffee routine is off, my whole day feels weird. And I can only imagine how much more important that predictability might be for someone with ASD.
That's a fantastic connection because you're right. Routine and predictability are vital for many on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Cheap ABA calls this insistence on sameness. And it's not just about being picky. Change can be deeply unsettling, even distressing for some individuals with ASD.
So going back to my coffee, if someone used my favorite mug, it wouldn't just be a little annoying. It might actually spike my anxiety if I had ASD.
Exactly. It might seem like an overreaction to someone who doesn't experience the world that way,
Right.
but for someone with ASD, that disruption to their routine can throw their whole world off kilter.
Because it's all about having that sense of control in a world that can feel very chaotic, right?
Precisely. And Cheap ABA gives this example that I think a lot of people can relate to, even if they don't have ASD. They talk about how a child might get incredibly upset if someone sits in their usual spot at the dinner table. It
Okay.
seems like a small thing, but
But it's not about the asterisk chair asterisk. It's about that feeling of predictability being yanked out from under you. It makes perfect sense when you think about it that way. Now, something else I found fascinating in Cheap ABA was this idea of stereotyped or repetitive movements. Is that like always tapping your foot or clicking a pen?
mm,
Because I do that sometimes, but
it can be that, but it's broader. Think about those repetitive actions that many individuals with ASD engage in, rocking, slapping their hands, spinning objects, lining up toys. These behaviors aren't just random. They serve a real purpose.
so it's not just fidgeting. There's a reason behind it. Are they
Yeah.
trying to communicate something specific?
Sometimes it can be about communication,
Okay.
but more often it's about self-regulation. Those movements can be incredibly calming and help manage anxiety, sensory overload, even just general discomfort. Imagine it like a coping mechanism that helps them feel grounded.
So it's like they're creating their own sense of order and predictability, but within their bodies and immediate surroundings. Like
Mhm.
the world might be chaotic, but this asterisk I can control.
Exactly. And Cheap ABA highlights this beautifully. They talk about how a child might spend hours arranging toy cars in a specific order. It's not about the cars themselves. It's about creating a sense of order and control that brings a sense of peace.
Which is a good reminder that what might look odd from the outside often makes perfect sense in the context of how someone with ASD experiences the world, right?
Absolutely. Understanding these behaviors is key to shifting our perspective and offering support in a way that truly resonates. Speaking of seeing the world differently, Cheap ABA also delves into highly restricted interests, which is something I find particularly interesting.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that mean exactly? Is it like having a really asterisk intense hobby?
It can be, but it's usually more than a casual interest. We're
Right.
talking about those all-consuming passions that many individuals with ASD have.
Right.
These interests can be anything from dinosaurs and trains to weather patterns or specific historical events. The key is the intense focus and depth of their interests.
Well, not just liking trains, but knowing every single model ever made, every train route in Europe, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And while these passions can be incredibly enriching, they can sometimes cause social friction. Cheap ABA gives this example of a child who's obsessed with dinosaurs, knows every fact imaginable.
But if you try to get them to talk about the latest Marvel movie, they're completely lost.
Precisely. It's not about being difficult, it's just how their brain is wired. Shifting their attention away from that intense interest can be like pulling teeth.
It makes you realize how differently we all experience the world and how much our brains influence our interactions. Speaking of different experiences, Cheap ABA also mentions sensory experiences, which I know is something a lot of people associate with ASD. What are the key takeaways our listeners should know about this?
This is crucial to understanding ASD because sensory input, how we process sights, sounds, smells, textures, it's all different for people on the spectrum. Some individuals are hypersensitive, meaning they experience things much more intensely than neurotypical people.
So a loud noise or bright light, kind of annoying to most, could be completely overwhelming for someone with sensory sensitivities.
Exactly. On the flip side, some with ASD are hyposensitive, meaning they need more asterisk sensory input to even register it.
So they might crave certain textures or sounds or not even flinch at a loud noise. That's fascinating.
It is, and it showcases the incredible diversity within ASD. Cheap ABA gives the example of a child covering their ears because of noise sensitivity. Imagine experiencing everyday sounds as painful. That's their reality.
Which makes creating sensory-friendly environments so important, right? Not just for kids, but for adults with ASD too.
Yeah.
It's about respect and understanding. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the specifics of ASD, all the different traits and challenges. But I think the biggest takeaway from Cheap ABA in our conversation today is this idea of the spectrum itself.
Couldn't agree more. It's not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. And understanding that is crucial.
Right.
Two people with ASD can have completely different strengths, challenges, ways of experiencing the world.
Exactly. It's like saying someone is athletic tells you very little, right? They're a marathon runner, a weightlifter, a gymnast. Huge difference.
Yeah.
It's the same with ASD.
Such a good point. Cheap ABA gives us a framework. But it's not about putting people in boxes. It's about broadening our understanding so we can better support and appreciate the incredible diversity within the autism community.
Yes. Let's celebrate neurodiversity, not just focus on the differences. And that actually leads perfectly into our final thought for our listener today. We've unpacked those core characteristics of ASD, but now we want to leave you with a question to ponder.
A bit of a brain teaser to take with you. I like it.
Exactly. Given the diverse ways ASD shows up, what are some things asterisk can do, big or small, to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for individuals on the spectrum?
It's a question worth continual reflection and action, because the more we understand, the better equipped we are to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they are.
This said it better myself. And on that note, we'll leave you to dive into your own thoughts and maybe even do a little research of your own. Until next time, keep those brains engaged, folks.